Good evening, everybody. My name's Michael Wilson, and I'm Chancellor of the University of Toronto. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for the David Peterson Leadership Lecture. And the title of this is Canadian Stability in an Age of Disruption, a very appropriate title. And the presenter will be the esteemed business leader, Dominic Barton. And like you, I look forward very much to hearing his thoughts on the global forces that are fundamentally disruptive and transforming our world economy and society, and is challenging all our leaders in the public sector as a result of this. Now, first, I'd like to recognize the Honorable David Peterson, the former Chancellor, my predecessor of the University of Toronto. David, why don't you stand up? Yeah. And David's wife, Shelley. And I especially introduce them because without their support, we wouldn't be here this evening. This lecture is just one part of the David Peterson program in public sector leadership, and is just one more example of the ardent championing of the School of Public Policy and their incredible dedication and support of the University of Toronto community. But before I turn things over to tonight's host, I want to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home of many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have this opportunity to work on this land. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Peter Loewen. Peter's a professor of political science. He's the former director of the Center for the Study of the United States, the Munk School of Global Affairs, and the newly appointed director of the University of Toronto's School of Public Policy and Governance. Peter? Thanks, Peter.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's really my pleasure to have and to welcome all of you here. I want to start as well by just giving a special greeting to Mr. Peterson and to Shelley Peterson. You know, those who have encountered David during his really his leadership and his chancellorship of the University of Toronto almost uniformly smile immediately when his name is mentioned. In no part, it's due to his mischievous sense of humor. Famously so, but of course it's also due to his warmth and his energy and his hard work as a champion of our university. Of course, Mr. Peterson's years as Chancellor are just one chapter in a very long story of public service and dedication to our city and to our province and to our country. He was, by all estimations, a transformative premier. He opened the doors of Queen's Park, both literally and figuratively, and he made the most of every day that he was in office. And his leadership changed the face of healthcare in our province, the face of education and its funding, our treatment of the environment, and not least, I think it's fair to say that it's under his watch that the face of our city started to change and become a more global city that grew up on the waterfront. The career Mr. Peterson launched after leaving office is, I think, unrivaled of any in Canadian politics. And through his outstanding generosity and his commitment, we've created the David Peterson Program in public sector leadership at the School of Public Policy and Governance. The program is attracting the talent and support needed to transform the school into Canada's top centre for public sector leadership development. In this, it is strengthening the University of Toronto, our province, and ultimately our country. And so it's very fitting indeed that it's named for our guest of honor, who has done both with such high distinction. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for what you've made possible for our school and through your example of leadership in this province. Now, we are living in extraordinary times. The next 20 years will be some of the most disruptive and exciting we've ever seen, driven by a number of global forces, transforming the world economy, our society at large, and our relationships with one another. Our guest today, our speaker, who we're so delighted to host, Dominic Barton, knows, as we all do, that smarter, healthier, and more prosperous societies require bold, innovative, and effective leadership in public policy and in governance. Policy decisions have a direct bearing on the lives of everyone at every level, and increasingly, policy experts are at the forefront in solving the world's most challenging and most vexing problems, from economic prosperity to healthcare, to education, to climate change and sustainable energy. And as these issues become more complex, the people required to address them must become broader thinkers, more technically adept, more flexible, and more knowledgeable. U of T's School of Public Policy and Governance is the answer to this pressing need. We're tapping into our vast intellectual resources across the university, ranging from economics and environmental science and engineering to public health and political science. And in a very short time, the school has established itself as the place for aspiring public policy experts in this country. We attract only the highest caliber faculty and the most exceptional students, and they're trained to be analytical, flexible thinkers capable of designing and implementing innovative public policy. Our students are becoming future leaders within and outside government, and it's incumbent upon us to train them on how to think about leadership and how to be effective trailblazers in the public realm. We are, in effect, an incubator for leaders committed to serving the greater public good. And with the right combination of talent and investment, we will become the country's greatest contribution to the world of public policy and governance, with an impact felt by people around the globe. Because this is our goal, to create people who are equipped for a changing world, it's my great pleasure to welcome this evening our guest speaker. Dominic Barton is the Global Managing Partner of McKinsey & Company. He happens, by our good fortune, to be Canadian, and he happens, by our good fortune, to be here today. He's going to speak to the forces that are creating some of the most monumental challenges for a generation. And he'll also shed light on the leadership traits that public sector leaders must possess to navigate this new environment. On these matters, Mr. Barton's unique and authentic insights are among the most important in the world today. So it's my great pleasure, and I ask you to join with me in welcoming Dominic Barton to the University of Toronto.
Thank you so much, Peter, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I have many slides I use from time to time on leadership, and I'm going to drive you crazy tonight because I'm going to be going through quite a number of them. But in one set of slides, I talk about leaders that I admire, and I particularly admire tri-sector athletes. Joe Nye talks about the ultimate leader is a leader who has done work in the public sector, in the private sector, and in the social sector, and then where you move it. And that's why, again, I'm very honored to speak here in front of you, Mr. Peterson, because you are one of the people that I put up on the picture because of your track record and what you do in all those three sectors and the impact, and that's inspiring to many people around the world. The second person is actually Michael Wilson. And I think, again, just as a role model, and some colleagues, I must say, when I travel around the world, why do you have a majority of Canadians? And I say because we seem to generate more leaders than other parts of the world in that part. But again, it's an honor to be here today. What I wanted to do for the next 45 minutes or so is actually go through some slides. Hopefully I'll be able to figure out if this works. And the basic structure is I do want to talk about these global forces, and I'm a bit embarrassed because a number of you have seen this before. So on the one hand, I'm worried about boring you. On the other hand, you might be happy that I'm not changing these global forces every week. They're the same. They seem to be the same thing, the long-term trends. But I do want to talk about that because I think it sets a context that I think we all need to have when we think about the future. I don't think you can think about leadership without context, and the context of what we're going to be working in and driving over the next 20 years, I do think is going to be remarkable from literally a 300-year time period. So I want to go through that a bit and why I think that, why I think a number of people think that, and what some of the implications might be for organizations. And then I do want to talk about what some of the specific implications might be for public sector leaders and I'm a huge admirer of public sector leaders. Wayne Wouters is here, is another one of my heroes as a clerk. There are many clerks here. Mel Cap, who I met this afternoon. And I do this with a bit of trepidation because I haven't been in the public sector, but I've felt I've had the chance to see and meet many remarkable leaders who are in the public sector and dealing with the challenges. And as I said to the students at lunch today, I can actually think of no higher calling than leading in the public sector, because as Peter said at the outset, we're going to need leaders to be able to help navigate it, particularly in the public sector. The private sector has a role to play too. But I want to talk, I do think there's going to be changes required for leaders in the public sector. My main message is the metabolic rate has to go up significantly in there. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about that. And then close with some dimensions of leadership which are beyond what leaders do and more on the characteristics of leadership, character in leadership more precisely. So that's what I'll do. And I hope, Michael, you'll throw something at 45 minutes, start standing up or stomping your feet to get me off here. So this is the overview. First, we are in a time of immense change. It's going to create lots of challenges and opportunities. I'm an optimist, so I think this is going to be a great time, particularly for Canada. I think we're well positioned to be able to thrive, but we're going to have to make bold moves. If we just do the usual, I think there's a high probability of becoming irrelevant. In a time of significant change, it's time to be bold. That's actually what being stable requires if you're going to move through it. And I think there is a sense that in times like this, you need some direction or strategy. You can't just sort of let it happen. And I would argue that many of us in the Anglo-Saxon world have kind of laughed and joked or looked a little askew at seeing some of the Asian countries that have strategies. That's for them, they're emerging and they're developing, and most of the Anglo-Saxon countries don't. I think that we better start learning from that side, because I do think we have to make some choices and we have to invest in some of the things we're doing. I think on the implications on the public sector, and I'll talk more about this later, I think that there are a number of shifts that will be required. One is this reallocation of capital and people. We found that those organizations that are very successful over time reallocate their resources, people and capital, on the range of 10% a year. Most organizations, including McKinsey, reallocate on last year's budget plus 1 or 2%. And the reason we do that is because when you reallocate by 10%, you're taking resources away from people and where you do it. It's not a nice thing to do, but it's a necessary thing to do. So that's one dimension I want to talk about. The ambition on innovation has to be very significant. Innovation is not about startups. Innovation, I think, is much more about incumbent organizations, and particularly in the public service. We have to be innovating at least at the rate at which the world is moving, and I would argue that we're not. And that's hard, because there are challenges, I think, in the public sector where risk is not exactly celebrated. You get whacked if you do something wrong, and the consequences are serious. It's a time to challenge orthodoxies, basic beliefs about how you've done your service and how you deliver. It's a time to challenge those things, as most organizations in the private sector are being forced to do by the market, and particularly by consumers. Consumers are the biggest drivers of change in the private sector today, not the market. It's consumers that are driving change. And I think in government, we're going to feel that in a significant way. Pushing the boundaries on this public-private collaboration is going to be critical. LCAP made a very interesting comment to me at lunch when you said, are we shifting to a world where now it's time for government, I think you said, to be efficient, and businesses being more, embracing of what's happening in society? There's sort of a shift going on. I think the point is both have to work more closely together to deal with some of the issues that are being raised by these times. Talent is never more important, I think, in this time. It's people that drive performance. So thinking about a career in the public service and where you move and how you grow, and the meritocracy is going to be critical, and of course leadership. So that's the summary. Now I'm just going to quickly go through the reason why we think there's going to need to be changes. There are four big forces that we think are going to literally shake the world over the next 20 years. First is the shifting economic power, the dramatic shift in the economy, the global economy towards Asia and to Africa. Technological change. This is one force that I would actually, if I compare it to 3 years ago, I would put double the weight on the technology than any of the other forces. It's just the speed and scale and scope of what technology is doing is something that we're all going to have to grapple with, and I think all institutions are not quite ready for the implications of that. The aging population, this is a very big issue for Canada. We are going to be the fastest aging OECD country over the next 20 years. I mean, Japan's already at a point this will have a very big impact on our productivity. And then we have this system-wide transformation, and this is, I think, a number of forces that have been boiling away for the last 20 years that we're now feeling. This is the Brexit, the Trump, what we're seeing in basically every major economy. You've got a lot of people that are dispossessed, that have been dislocated and are angry. And they don't like to listen to facts and reason because they have not participated in the changes that are moving through. And there are a number of other dimensions. So our assumptions, particularly as business people, that we're operating in a nice box where, you know, free markets are the right way that we do things, free trade is a good thing. These are being challenged. And I think we can't just sit back and let the box be defined. We're all going to have to work on it. So those are the forces, and I'm just going to go through them very, very quickly. One way to just illustrate the scale and speed with which the global economy has shifted back toward the east is if in the year zero you tried to balance the world on a flat piece of paper, the center would be somewhere in Pakistan, right? And then it took essentially 2,000 years to move to Iceland, because as the Western Europe, the U.S. economy moved. And basically in a 75-year period, we're going to go all the way back to where we were, right? The dominant economy in the world for well over 2,000 years was in Asia. It was China and India, and we're going back. And that's why history, I think, is a very good thing to be looking at today when we look at the future. The Silk Road, which was the major trade artery, or Silk Roads, you know, for well over 1,500 years, is today the fastest growing trade route on Earth. And that's why when the Chinese are talking about one belt, one road, you know, we should pay attention to that and where it is, and we should participate in where that is. This is going to mean about 2.4 billion new middle-class consumers are going to come into the system in the next 15 to 20 years. And that is, in a sense, almost a gravitational force because it's driven by urbanization. We're seeing roughly 20 million people a year moving from rural areas to cities in China. China's only 54% urbanized, so they've still got a long way to go on their growth path. But you look at India, Indonesia, and then Africa in particular, it's going to be significant. And so this is where this is going to have some very, I think, positive implications for Canada, given we have a lot of the capabilities and resources that are going to be demanded by people. It may not feel that way now with commodity prices and so forth, but that's going to shift. But economic power is going to shift in terms of where the biggest businesses in the world are, where I think we're going to see more investment in education and R&D over time and how we link up. One of the ways that I'd like to illustrate it is just by photos. This is Shenzhen in 1980, where Deng Xiaoping did his famous comment about, I don't care if the cat's a black cat or a white cat, a communist cat, a capitalist cat. If it catches a mouse, I like it. And that's what Shenzhen looked like in 1980 when he visited it, and that's what that same piece of dirt looks like, 35 years later. And that's happening in 200 cities across Asia right now. It's relentless, the growth that we're seeing. And many of these cities are actually the size, like Chongqing, are the size of Canada in terms of the population, and they're growing as they move through it. So we need to think about these cities that we're going to be dealing with over time, not just the countries. We think about China not as a country, but as 22 clusters of cities in where they are. That's going to mean we're going to see a very significant demand for food that we haven't seen in our history: milk, meat, and so forth. It's going to have a very big implication on resource efficiency and how we use our resources. Climate change, the pressures on climate change are going to be even more severe with the 2.4 billion that want to eat and live like we do. One of the things we worry about is water, a 56% potential excess demand versus supply of water. And we already see conflicts occurring where you see water shortages, right? I think there's going to be a very significantly rising tension between Egypt and Ethiopia over time. Ethiopia is becoming a breadbasket. It's a food powerhouse, and they're using the water at the head of the Nile, which actually is a lot in Ethiopia, but Egypt thinks it really belongs to them, and we're going to start to see those tensions in many different parts of the world. Canada, we're a beneficiary of having a huge amount of water. We're actually one of the most inefficient users of water, though, as we go through it. One of the things that we also are looking at here is that we've sort of passed, if you will, peak production in a number of food classes already. That's what this sort of strange chart is trying to show, is we're hitting the peak levels. So the idea that we're going to have an infinite amount of food because of how technology moves is, I think, a pretty bold assumption to make. Food security is a big issue, and that's why in China you see very significant attempts to be buying companies, to be building and linkages with the major food producers. If you go to Ethiopia, for example, in Addis Ababa, you will literally see the tarmac covered with Chinese jets, right, at Hainan Airways, everything you can imagine there. You see Korea, South Korea has basically leased something in the order of 7 million hectares of farmland in Ethiopia. And again, food security is something people are going to be looking at. This is, again, I think, plays to our advantage. So when you see these changes, we're going to see a very large growth in the number of consumers. We think, for example, in Asia, we'll need to have 76 Procter & Gamble's being built, their equivalent size, just to service the Asian portion of the 2.4 billion. Natural resources are, we believe anyhow, that the commodity prices will be moving back up again, given the constraints that we're seeing on the resource side. Ag food, I think, is going to be one of the most exciting industries that we have, even though it's not typically seen that way. It's actually a high-tech industry, and it's an area where I think Canada can play a bigger role. Education will be extremely important in this world. It's Australia's third largest export, which a lot of us forget. It's our tertiary education system is world class, as per Stephen, your appointment to the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge. I mean, I just think that's the universities here, the innovation that goes on, it's world class, and I think there's a lot more students from around the world that would like to be able to participate in that system. Tourism, 110 million outbound travelers from China. They spend more money per tourist than a U.S. tourist and where they are. And I think this is an area too for Canada. It's one of the best ways too to have people move up the income chain. Larry Summers talks about this, as well as the hospitality industry being one of the biggest conveyor belts of social mobility and where things are. Technology and innovation, I think, is going to be, I'll come back to this more, a very important part of what we see in front of us. Security issues, much more significant. I'll come back to that. And then infrastructure. In the world, we're short about $57 trillion of infrastructure that we need. We think in Canada it's about $500 billion. And the odd thing is there is a very large amount of long-term capital that would like to invest in that, but can't. And we're in a period of time with low rates, so there's going to be opportunities here. So these are not small, little incremental things that can be done. These are very big, large arenas of opportunity for Canada, but it won't happen automatically. I think there will be many people looking at where they can play in it. We should just know that there are opportunities that are out there. Technology change, as I said, is the one I would sort of double-click faster, where I think we have to all be aware of it. It's driven by the massive increase in computing power, connectedness, and data. This is disrupting everyone. One of the ways that you can look at computing power is how a computer compares to an insect or an animal or a human. And we're at the level of an insect brain now. We are moving towards a mouse brain, and we probably will be at the human brain level in the mid-2020s. And I think the fundamental issue, and that's what the people at Singularity University talk about, is when do we get to all human brains with artificial intelligence, right? And again, Canada I learn the most about artificial intelligence here, actually in Toronto. We have some of the best researchers also in Montreal and Vancouver. And what I think the artificial intelligence does, another way to look at it is it's lowering the cost of prediction. What happened with semiconductors, it lowered the cost of arithmetic. And so the implications in other industries are very significant. And I think, again, think about the public sector. What does that mean if you're lowering the cost of prediction to what we do every day in where we are? We have many more devices that are connected than humans. That generates a huge amount of data and opportunity to innovate. Again, when it comes to this, the public sector has a massive amount of data. How do we leverage that data to innovate, to provide more targeted services, and to learn and improve? And that computing power element of things is only one of many of the changes that we're seeing. We're also seeing changes in robotics. We're seeing a lot of change in biotech, on the biotech front. Energy storage, which has in a sense following its own Moore's law, is something that we need to look at. And then various manufacturing devices. AB&B just literally recently did 3D printed a bridge. You think about it, they 3D printed a bridge which a truck can drive over, right? So you just think about what that means to manufacturing and where we move, and that's of course happening now. I'm going to skip through some of these slides just to keep a little bit on time here. But one of the things about technology I think we also have to think about is it's forcing us to challenge orthodoxies. I was taught when I was doing undergraduate economics that to run a business you had to own assets. Well, that doesn't seem to have to be the case for a number of players that are out there. If you look at Airbnb, who basically are now the largest hotel chain in the world without owning a single asset, right? The distribution, the idea for Walmart that they would be having a competitor on the mobile internet, even as far back as 2012, would have just been a shock. And if I remember having conversations with Mike Duke in 2010, I always ask CEOs 3 questions. What are the 3 things you're excited or worried about? And then a second set of questions is, if you could speak to yourself as a young leader, now that you've been a leader for a while, what are the 3 things you do differently or that you teach yourself? And what Mike Duke said in 2010 was, we have to become a technology company. I remember I was in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? You're the #1 retailer in the world. He goes, no, we have to become a technology company because I see it with my consumers. 5% of my products are now being competed for on the internet. 40% of my products, people look at the internet before they come into our stores, and there are people out there that are innovating. But my organization's so confident, and rightly so, that they think I'm crazy when I talk about that. And when I try and hire technology people to come in, they actually don't want to come to Bentonville for some reason. They want to be in, California or New York. And so, and then when I asked Doug McMillan, who became the CEO about a year and a half ago, what his 3 issues were and where they were, his first comment was, I wish we'd listened to Mike in 2010 in where it is. So this is happening to everyone. Every industry is being affected by this. And one of the challenges with technology is it's creating a lot more revenue and value, market cap, with far less employees, right? So if you took the big 3 in 1990 in the US and compared it to the big 3 today, it's about 1/10 the number of jobs. So few people are generating a lot. If you think about WhatsApp, I think it had 33 people. They sold the business for $19 billion. It's a pretty focused set of returns that are there. And that's what technology can do. And that's a different environment than what we've been used to when you think about it from a policy point of view. The automation of work is another thing that we need to think about. This is just an array of activities that can be automated with existing technology today. And it's something that we're looking at quite closely on the Growth Council, because we want to make sure that we are skilling people and have the programs in place to make sure that Canadians are going to be able to be working over time. And what we worry about is the churn rate as we look ahead. We think, as we look ahead, that nearly half of the current 18.1 million jobs are at serious risk of being automated, right? And that's, whether we're 25% or 50% off, that's a big number. And the challenge today is we used to have a generation to be able to adopt or absorb a technology, but these technologies are happening within a generation. So for the driverless truck drivers, if you will, there's still people that drive in the driverless truck. I'm sure their children are going to be ready and prepared to be in this digital world. I'm not so sure about those drivers that are being replaced, and we have a lot of commercial drivers in Canada in the system, and those driverless trucks are working today. Utah allows driverless trucks in where it is. Daimler Freightliner its largest production of trucks now are automated trucks in where it is. So it's happening. The other issue that's going on is we're seeing the rise of more independent workers. So, it used to be the case that all of us worked for an organization, a company, the government, and so forth. A very small percentage were working for themselves. What we're seeing now in a large number of countries in the OECD is up to 20 to 30% of people are, if you will, self-employed or independent in what they're doing. Some happily, some very unhappily, because there isn't a job and they're looking for other opportunities. The picture here is Uber is an example of how people have been able to supplement income or find income as they go through it. So these are some of the technology shifts that we need to think about, which affect really all the core areas that we're looking at. There is also, again, the risk side. This is my top worry in McKinsey. The thing I'm most frightened of is cybersecurity, because all we need is a hack on our information, which we're holding for our clients in a confidential base, and it'll be existential for us. And how do you do it? And that's when I do think Eric Holder has something. There's only 2 types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. It's something to worry about. Aging population. The world is getting older as we go through it. I think that's wonderful on many dimensions from a wisdom point of view as we get older. But the other thing we have to realize is that older people cost more money, if I could be so crass as to say that. I think it's sort of 75% of healthcare costs are consumed in the last 3 years of a person's life. And I don't know if, our policy, our corporations are ready for this. In Spain, one of our clients, which is the railway company, the average age of the senior management team is 59. There are 10 of them. The retirement age is 60. So just think about what that means in terms of where you're moving through it. And obviously, we have to rethink, I think, what retirement age really should be and where it is. But in Canada, as I said, we have a particularly big challenge on that front that we're going to have to face, because we are going to be becoming more aged than any other of the OECD countries. And the final shift I just want to talk about is these more fundamental areas that affect how the operating environment. In fact, to me, I call it the box. We all assume we're working in a particular sandbox. And what I'm saying here is the sandbox edges are being shifted again by people. Rising inequality, polarization in the media and politics, more displacement because of technology and trade, and rising geopolitical instability. I'm not going to spend, I think those are sort of obvious. The worry we have is with them all coming together, we could end up in places that we collectively don't want to be. I found, for example, the Colombian vote, even the FARC vote, just again, it's shocking. But again, and again in that lunch, we talked about it again, Mel, you raised, you want to have evidence-based, fact-based policy and making decisions in companies, but the people may not want to actually listen to that. They're more focused on the emotional side. I don't think it means you don't have the evidence base, but you have to rethink how you communicate. So what I feel is the elite in the world is getting a series of slaps in the faces over the last 12 months, and I don't think we're finished. And the worry with that is that can then lead to more of a vicious downward cycle. I'm not going to go through all of these pages. I think they're pretty self-evident. The one I'd just say on the politics, which I think this is the U.S., so forgive me for that, but it's just this increasing polarization between Democrats and Republicans as you're going through. And I think we're seeing that in most societies where you've got the edges that are pulling people apart. I think the media has played a role in this. I think it's also technology. It used to be the case in the mid-1990s, if you wanted to get a show on CBS, you had to have an audience of 6 million people, or they just simply wouldn't look at it, which in a sense, by definition, meant you had to be focused in the middle. You couldn't be too extreme in where you are. But with technology today, if you have 15,000 people that might be interested in your comments, you can put up a site and you can have a set of followers. And I think the media has become more dispersed. And I'll be interested in your views as to whether you think that's the case or not. But I do think that we're not watching the same things. We're watching what our tribe likes to watch and where it is, and that's I think a worry. I think they're less extreme in Canada. We should celebrate that, but we shouldn't take it for granted. I mean, even immigration. This is a passion of mine. I think we should be having more immigrants coming into the country. It's actually a source of productivity. But we better not take it for granted. That Angus Reid poll recently, and you got to work that, or it could go the other way. And I think the UK is a good example of that. I'm going to skip through some of these. The only thing I'd say on geopolitics, and this is again a context shift for me. When I joined McKinsey here in Toronto in 1986. There was a very strong view that capital markets actually drove the system, right? They're nation states, but capital markets really kind of, you better listen to them as a government. And it was I think it was the truth. And the epitome for me was when George Soros took on the Bank of England. I think it was in 1992, 1991. I can't remember the exact date. But to have a single fund leader take on an esteemed central bank and force them to do something was kind of look out. And so there's a sense of you better pay attention to what the markets want to do. And I think we're in a very different place today where geopolitics is something that business and everyone has to take into effect. It's one of the reasons, by the way, it's amazing. And Margaret McMillan is probably one of the most popular speakers on the circuit in Europe. And it's really about her pre-World War I perspectives, which is not a very uplifting thing to hear, but I think it just tells you sort of the state of what's happening on that front. We are seeing now some iconic companies that are saying we Please don't see us as globalizers or as a global multinational. We're a local company. This is Jeff Immelt at a commencement speech just 6 months ago, right? Saying the currency of the realm are jobs. We can't, be shipping locomotives from Connecticut to Kenya. We have to build them in Kenya. And again, there's all sorts of discussion and debate about the world order. Where are we moving? So I just say this in the sense of that stability of the sandbox is something that we need to think about. One of the direct implications is that the churn rate of organizations, at least private sector organizations, has gone up. The way I look at it is in the private sector is there's someone, I think it's mainly driven by technology, but some of the other forces, you're on a treadmill that's got a sort of a 2-degree slope, and there's this arm that comes in from time to time, says, you're going 10K? Well, guess what? It's 20K now. Now, you know what? We're going to make it 5 degrees and 30K. And people have just got used to what was happening before. And that treadmill is going faster. And so we're seeing that the average lifetime of large established organizations is shrinking. And then again, I think we have to think about this from a metabolic rate point of view in our organizations. Are we changing fast enough? And there's unfortunately no speedometer. Even for private sector companies, there's no, I look at it in McKinsey, we're trying everything we can to change, but I'm not sure if we're moving fast enough. About 40% of what we do today didn't exist 5 years ago. I'm not sure it's fast enough in where it is. But the organization doesn't like it. They think it's too fast, right, in where you go. And if I then take that to the public sector, what do we think the right speed should be in where we're moving? How do we even measure that? But what I would assert is we need to move faster. And that's why I get into the public sector side. For some reason, my screen's gone blank. Probably the signal I should shut up right at this point. Is this okay, the speed, or you okay? So this resource, what I'm going to do is just quickly bang through these 6 themes, and I will shut up here. But one of the things I think is most important is this reallocation of resources, as I said, and those organizations that change it at more than 10% every year far outperform those that don't. And so again, when you think about that on the public sector side, whether you're in Ontario or in Ottawa, and we think about the people, are we moving people in those areas? Are the size of certain departments relevant for today? Are there departments that we don't have that we should have over time? And I think it's very difficult to be able to do that because of risk, inertia, and so forth. But I think we need to be thinking about ways to be able to do it. The most extreme version of this, right, is 3G in Brazil. What you don't want to do is have 3G come and visit you, because what they do is zero-based budgeting. They go, you know what? We actually don't care what you've been doing before. It doesn't actually interest us. We're going to start from a clean sheet of paper and figure out how we do it. And I can tell you from colleagues that have worked at Heinz and Kraft and Anheuser-Busch and so forth, it's a pretty shocking shift in terms of what happens. But that's what we're seeing going on in the public sector. The trade network, as we think about that global shift towards Asia and to Africa, where are our resources in Canada? Where are they aligned? My own view is we are still too much focused on the Atlantic, and Europe's important, but what are we doing in terms of building relationships with these cities, let alone countries, that are emerging very quickly? What about Africa? And when I look at the young leaders here, which I'm very jealous of because you're going to be leading in these exciting times, Africa is going to be a very, very important part of the economy. We may not think about that today, but what are we doing to forge relationships at the educational level, at the business level, at the government level, for a region that's shifting? And I think thinking about our network, why is it that Mexico has more trade agreements than we do? I mean, one thing I'm deeply thankful for is NAFTA, which I think did it pass by one vote in Congress, I think, when it went through, but it was it took bold leadership to get from Canada, from the U.S. and from Mexico, but I think these trade agreements are very important for us, and I think we need to be forging deeper relationships in other parts. So, thinking again in the public sector, what is it? Where are our ambassadors? Where are our trade resources being focused, and so forth? Ambition is another one, an innovation, and my model is always the Koreans. I always do the thought experiment when I think about Canada. When we're looking and someone says be bold, I always imagine, what if Korea took over Canada? What would those guys do? And they'd be pretty dramatic. And this is a picture. I actually keep it in my London office. It's a picture of the POSCO plant in 1970, and you've got T.J. Park, who's a businessman, on the left. You've got President Park, who is in the middle, and then you have a worker on the right. And they built this steel company having a GDP per capita which would be just a little bit above the Congo, right, in terms of where they are. The World Bank told them, you will not build a steel plant. You have no economy, you have no natural resources, and you have no energy. That is probably the stupidest thing you could do. I always say, if McKinsey was there, we'd have told them 10 times, and we would have written it down. You shouldn't do it. They built it. It today is the world's most productive steel company in the world. There's a notion of ambition in where we want to do it. And there wasn't much to work from except the human capital in what they're driving. I think there are barriers to talking about doing this in the public sector. I don't know if these resonate. These are more maybe to get feedback later on. I think that its efficiency may not be rewarded, again, because if you have, you take out cost now, you're going to have less next year. There's a notion of that. It is difficult, I think, fundamentally, and that's why I think business leaders are better business leaders if they've had experience in government, because it's more complex in government. You have multiple goals. You don't just have one, and I think that's a deeper mental exercise than being in a company, but that's a challenge. I think risk-taking and experimentation are not accepted. Last night at a UBC alumni event, there was a very inspiring conversation with a young graduate who's at the TTC. And what I loved about this guy was passionate about being in the TTC. I'm here, I'm there, and he said, I've got all sorts of ideas about what I want to do, but he goes, what we're focused on is making sure we have, bus stops that are friendly by 2025. I'm probably misunderstanding what he said. And he says, we got to think about automation. Uber's already thinking about this, but it's hard to have the conversation in where it is. And I said, why don't you go do it? And he goes, well, some of my mentors say, just keep your mouth shut. You'll get your chance to be able to do it. And I'm not suggesting that's typical at all. I'm just saying you got a young, driven, excited leader that wants to do something but doesn't feel they have a space to be able to shake it up. Hierarchy. When I look at organizations out there, and this is, again, forgive me too much on the private sector, the delayering that is going on and has been going on in the last 3 years is something I've never seen before. You've got, Dow DuPont moving from 9 levels to 4 levels, right? HSBC going from 13 levels to 8 levels. It's ugly and painful, but it's happening. The most dramatic is Haier, the Chinese white goods manufacturer. They make, washing machines and so forth. They've gone from an 80,000 person pyramid, a classic hierarchical structure, to breaking that down to 200 business units, right? And again, this is another example of McKinsey's not there, and if we were there, we would have told them, do not do that under any circumstances because you're going to get chaos. But what they've done by flattening the place and decentralizing and allowing people to be, if you will, innovative, come up with their ideas, share in the back office what the platform is, they've dramatically improved their performance, right? And you can see what they're doing on all the dimensions. So the layering is something that we need to look at. And I think, again, on talent, again, as I said at the outset, I seriously would say I've never met better talent than I've had the chance to see in government. The leadership we have, we're blessed to have that, but we've got to make sure that we are able to continue to attract and retain it over time. I think everyone's worried about that, and I think what talent's looking for, I think top talent, because we spend a lot of time focused on this, is not income and money. They're looking for purpose, and they're looking for being able to make a difference, and they don't want to wait till they're 50 before they can pull some levers in where they are. And so I think thinking about how to unleash talent in that environment is something we should do. So these may be way off. So as I said, I haven't had the opportunity to work in but it's just they're observations that I would make. So again, these are some of the elements I think we have to think of. When I say incentives for innovating, it's not, again, financial. It's more positive in the sense that if you fail, you're not shut down or your career is over. You simply can't have innovation without that as you move through it. I think we're going to have to see a significant amount of innovation in policy. This is why I think it is one of the most exciting jobs to be in over the next 20 years is in the public service and in policy. And I know there's been a lot of innovation. For me, one of the biggest ones was, the pension. Just think about that and what that meant for people, for humanity. That was back in 1881. I think, and I know there's been a lot more policy innovation since then. I'm not suggesting that's the last one, but we're going to have to have a higher run rate. One of the things we again talked about at lunch, one of the things that I worry about, for example, is labor dislocation, right? And I think if we're going to have a tighter tie between the people that actually benefit from dislocation, i.e. people like me, we actually benefit from free trade, disruption. We're telling our clients to move faster. But do we pay the price for that? This is where I've argued, I've said some of my colleagues in McKinsey get very angry when I say it, but I say it, should I have a special tax on me, 5% as a labor dislocation tax, that's specifically that's going to fund people that are being dislocated? And again, that's probably a really bad idea, but I think we have to be thinking about how we're tying people, because right now, I'll be giving tons of speeches about the importance of free trade and dislocation and disruption and so forth, but I don't really pay any price from that. And I think that's something we have to start thinking about, because part of the anger, and I've felt this in the UK, is how dare you come and speak to us and tell us about why it's good to have open immigration and these markets work when you're sitting in London and you're in a totally different world than I'm living in. I'm just not interested in listening to your facts as you go through it. So I think we're going to have a lot more policy innovation. I think this cooperation between governments and the private sector and social sector is important. One that I look at a community level that to me is world-class is Itasca in Minneapolis, where you've got business, the governor, the mayor, NGOs that work on issues. Education is a priority. How they've actually brought a lot of immigrants in from the Sudan and other parts of Africa. How do we make sure they get jobs? Looking at innovation, and it's an amazing group of leaders that volunteer and do it and have built, I think, an incredible record. And you look at the sense of stability in that community is very high because everyone's involved and spending time together. They're all working together, and I think it's, again, a model to look at. I think we've also got to look at more global areas. When I get depressed about Russia and the U.S. and Syria and what's happening, we shouldn't forget, too, that for some reason, despite all that, we seem to be able to work together on the space station, which is a pretty complicated piece of machinery, using different measures, different languages, and it works extremely well. And why can't we find more of those types of efforts? And I think that takes leadership too. Those are ideas that we put forward to get people to work. I mentioned the hire example. I'm gonna skip through it. And I do think we need to be thinking about what career paths look like. And again, if I look at leading private sector organizations, all of them today have what I would call a People 2025 strategy. They're looking at what are the types of people we want to bring in, what is it that's going to be attractive for people over a career that's going to be different than the past, no matter how successful they are. I think, Wayne, what you were driving in the public service before you went, the blueprint, was a wonderful way of doing that, of involving the public sector and understanding how things work and where things move. But we've got to do this, because if we can't keep attracting and retaining top talent here, we're going to all be in trouble when I go back to the sandbox side of it. I unfortunately don't have any good ideas on this one, or any less good ideas than the other. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I will be quiet here, is on the leadership side, because I think that one of the things that I've noticed is that we focus too much on what leaders do and how they do it, as opposed to who the leaders are. And I think that the most important sort of factor as we look ahead on leadership is who leaders are, character, because you can't have a playbook for every issue given this disruption as we look ahead. And I think it's a lot of characteristics like this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the notion of resilience, the ability to deal with setbacks and keep moving forward, whether they're personal, professional, whether they're fair or unfair. Selflessness, the notion of people can tell very quickly who you're doing something for and why you're doing it. And I think this is a very important factor. One of my favorite sayings, it's a Buddhist saying. I'm not a Buddhist, but I love the saying, and the saying goes as follows: the more you give without expecting to get back, the more you will get. But you never forget the middle part, and you give, if you will. Purpose-driven, we've heard a lot about that. The telescope and microscope, I actually learned that from Jim Flaherty. I asked him, what's one of the things you would tell your young self? And he said, I wished I had figured out earlier how to put a microscope in one eye and a telescope in the other, and without getting a headache. And I said, seriously? You do? And he goes, no, it's a concept. And I said, I got it. But he said it's the idea of, being able to think long range. He said, I'm the finance minister of Canada. I have to deal with whatever crazy issue comes up in the markets. I have to be able to deal very quickly. It could happen in an hour, it could happen in a day, it could happen in a week. I have to be ready to deal with that. But I can't be so obsessed with that I wake up and in 2020 we're not where the country could be, right? And many business leaders are either microscope users or telescope users. It's very difficult to do both, actually, when you go through it. So those are just some of the characteristics. I won't, for the sake of time, go through all of them, but I do think this character in leadership is important. Again, at the lunch, what I was saying is that from a personal point of view, one of the courses I wish I had focused on earlier in my career was philosophy. I didn't do it because it was too difficult, and I thought I wouldn't get very good marks, so I didn't do it. That's honestly why I didn't do it. But I wish I did, because that understanding of how to make right versus right decisions, how to deal with a sort of a set of thinking to handle anything coming through, I think is a very useful thing to do. So I think that there's a lot of leaders. I'm not going to pick through too many. One, Alex Gorski, I'll just say it, Johnson & Johnson, he always says that one of the things that he wished he did more of is think about the second bounce of the ball. We're very good at looking at the immediate implication, right? And one example I'll give of this, and I've talked about this before, if you think about semiconductors, again, lowering the cost of arithmetic. If you were at Kodak, right, you go, that's interesting change, we could probably use semiconductors and what we're doing. What lowering the cost of arithmetic did was change photography from a chemicals business to a math problem, right? The other example I've used, if you're a cardiac surgeon in New York, a top-class cardiac surgeon, and you're doing heart transplants, you probably don't care too much about automated vehicles. Well, you should, because unfortunately 85% of the heart supply comes from car accidents. It's not a very nice story to say, but I'm just saying we're getting, cross-sector, second bounce type things that we need to look at. Things are coming together more. Who is your competitor? May not be in your traditional industry if you're a business. It may be coming from another area. Prioritizing and compartmentalizing. This is just an honest view of his first time. He fortunately, in a sense, says I had a second chance to be able to do it. But one of the things about compartmentalization, I'd say, is it's the ability to be able to also deal with a very complicated issue and not be obsessed by it for the whole day. One CEO I met who ran an insurance company said, in my first week as CEO, if I'd met you, I'd have kicked you out. I said, why is that? He said, not because of the silly things you're saying, but because in my first week, my general counsel told me we were being sued for $10 billion. And everything I looked at, a microphone, having lunch, was a $10 billion. I just couldn't not focus on it. And he goes, I'm talking to you today, and I've got 6 of those, like plates spinning behind my back, right? But I can focus on you. And he goes, and I said, well, how do you learn that? He goes, I don't know. You have to, but it's not taught in business school, how you do that. But this notion of compartmentalizing. Another one, Randall Stevenson. He's someone who's I admire a lot, a arch capitalist, shareholder value-driven person. He leads the Business Roundtable in the U.S., was selected the CEO of the year last year, leading change in one of the fastest changing industries, but a deeply caring individual. You'd never think that, but I'll give an example. He came out and said, of my 260,000 workers, 30,000 are not going to be viable in the next 5 years because of technology. And instead of doing what people thought he would do or what other CEOs would do, which is to say, therefore, I'm going to fire these people and take a charge, he said, what I've done is establish a training course with Georgia Tech, Uda City, and another internet education company. And I've enabled it to be set up such that workers can take the courses, get medallions while they're working. And if they decide to do it, and it doesn't cost them any money, they will be able to continue. If they don't, they're going to go. Right? That's back to old-style capitalism, like what Unilever did, where you take care of the society in which you're operating. And he talks about that with his organization. This notion of managing your energy versus your time. The world's moving too fast now to be able to think about, where am I going to spend my time? It's the energy you have. When do you make big decisions? In a very tiny way for me, I never make a big decision in McKinsey after 2 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch, because I know I'll be too tired and I just want to get it done, and it's always a bad decision. So it's just saying they're going to be made at a particular time during the day. One of the fastest growing advisory services for CEOs is energy management. It's actually led by a former tennis coach named Tony Schwartz. And it's teaching people of how to manage their energy and create their energy. And the last thing I just say, because this is something I'm trying to learn from right now. He was saying, if you're a world-class athlete, it's not the training that you put in, it's your recovery that actually differentiates you between being a gold medalist or a silver medalist. It's the recovery. How fast can you recover? This is a whole area that I think we're going to think about. And I think in the public sector, when I look at what leaders have to deal with there, just the range of issues. Again, I'm not to pick on you, Wayne, but I remember in some of the sessions when he'd give a summary of what happened in the last week, and it felt like you must mean the last 2 years, not the last week, and it's just all the series of issues that are coming in on that. Being a chief people officer, one of the best developers of women leaders in the world is this guy, KV Kamath in India. He's generated more women CEOs than any CEO I know on the planet. And it's strange to think, right, that's coming from India. But he's always considered himself the chief people officer. He now runs the New Development Bank in Shanghai, right? Interestingly, he's a tri-sector athlete. He spent time in the World Bank. He spent time in Indonesia with an NGO, and then he was basically working with a startup bank as they went through it. And I think I'm just going to end on this because it's something that I believe. I think that, again, for you that are choosing this calling, I commend you because I think it truly is the highest order calling. I don't think you get all of the kudos and the positive feedback like others get in their other roles, but you play such an important role in helping shape the sandbox that we're going to be working in and moving. And the only thing I'd say is I think that the need for the metabolic rate to go up and the innovation that's going to be required, and therefore the leadership to make that happen when it's not the normal thing to do, is going to increase significantly over time. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening.
We have some time for Q&A, so I'm going to ask someone to let me know when it's 10 after 7. But before that, you can write down some questions on cards, and they'll be delivered to me. But I just want to start by asking you a few questions about talent and about leadership in the public sector and in the private sector. And one of the things that's most interesting about Mr. Barton is he talks to, I think, on average, 2 CEOs or 2 leaders a day, and he's in a position where he can ask them questions about what they've learned from their experiences. And I thought it was quite interesting that you asked this question about what people wish they had known or what they could tell themselves into the future. And I wonder what the differences are you see between public sector leaders when you ask them that question and private sector leaders, and what does that tell us about the challenges of leading in the public sector?
On some dimensions, they're similar because I think they've got large organizations that are having to do too much with too few resources and the demands and they're in the arena. I mean, I'm a big fan of that Teddy Roosevelt notion of when you're a leader, you're in the bull ring with the red, and there's people on the side eating popcorn telling you to, do it this way, but you're the one that gets gored if it doesn't work. And those of us having popcorn will just get another pack and let's see who else comes in. And I think, public sector leaders, whether you're a permanent secretary or I think there's a sense of the ownership and the pressure and dealing with that stress. So in that dimension, there's some similar things. The difference to me, I think, is that I feel that a lot of public sector leaders have less degrees of freedom, and I feel that over time it's actually got the politics or the political side has become more powerful, and I think that's frustrating. And it's sort of how do I, so a lot of the discussion is how do I manage that and also try and influence things and move forward and deal with the risk. But on issues, again, I said like microscope, telescope, that you see it with CEOs, you see it with resilience is a lot of leaders say, I actually think failure is a good leadership development exercise. You don't want to force people to fail, but you want to make sure people are taking risk, because the stronger leaders are the ones that have actually are more resilient. They've taken more risk, and so how do we build that into the system? I don't know if that makes sense.
That's very helpful. What are you seeing in terms of people working for the long term? I know that it's been a long-term focus of yours that corporations should be thinking about deploying capital for the long term and making decisions for the long term. In the political realm, the big challenge we have is that people operate under political business cycles, that they're in a position where they're worried not only about if not the next week, certainly 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. And there are occasionally flashes of leadership with things like a carbon tax or a free trade agreement, when governments are willing to make big moves. But what lessons are there from the private sphere that you're seeing around those who can plan for the long term that have application to the public sector?
Well, I think both systems have become more short-term. I mean, I've focused more on the capital markets. This is with actually a lot of Mark Wiseman, Larry Fink, Andrew Liveris, and there's been a marked shift in increase in short-termism, quarterly capitalism, and people, CEOs feeling the pressure that they won't make net present value positive investments if it means missing the quarter by a cent. And the way that's changed is, number one, you try and find the right investors that are long-term and will back you. And that's what Paul Pullman at Unilever did. Sort of when he came in, first 6 weeks, said, I'm not going to do quarterly guidance, and I'm a long-term player, and if you don't like that, sell my stock. Of course, he says, when he talks about this, he realized how fast it was easier to lose shareholders than to gain them. But he's got a realignment of shareholders that believe it, and then it's the courage. It's the courage to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to explain how it's going to work. And I've seen leaders that say, and if you don't like that, take me out. So there's a courage, and that's where it goes. On the public sector, I worry a lot about the short-termism. And this isn't a very, I don't think we have very many long-term leaders in the political world today. I'm going to be very, I don't know if there's politically, David Cameron, I mean, putting a vote like that to the people is just gambling at the highest order. I'm not, we can talk about, and that's trying to make sure you can, move it forward. So there's a certain amount, I think, of courage. Angela Merkel is someone who I have a huge amount. She's got massive courage, right, just to do what she thinks. So I think courage is one. But I also think you have to look at the other way I look at it, because we do work with political leaders, is saying, do you want to be remembered in history, or do you want to be, popular now? And I know that's maybe doesn't sound very good, but it's every time I see Gerhard Schroeder, the German chancellor who's out there, I thank him, because he's the one that did the labor reform in Germany, which Germany's benefiting, and it cost him his government. He'll say he paid the ultimate price, but he's a hero. Again, I'm so.
No, I mean the Merkel case is a great example of someone is a giant on her political stage, and she's worked very hard to get herself to that place, and then did something from a position not of self-interest at all, but from principle, and could be paying a huge price for it in the next election. So seeing how she comes through that.
One of the things I would say is I do, and again, I'm not qualified to talk about it because I'm not a political leader, but I do think there's something about the narrative of the story, and being able to explain to people why is it important and really spending the time to get out there and do it and to convince people of where you're going, and it's using common language, not numbers and statistics and so forth. And I think we could, I thought Obama was perfectly positioned to do that. He's one of the best speakers I've ever heard, but I don't think he just didn't spend the time doing in the retail side of it, I think, and he could have. And my heroes are FDR, who, before World War II, in 1939, Americans didn't want to go to war. I mean, he pushed, he led it. I don't know if you guys have seen the film, I think All the Way. It's the one with Lyndon Johnson and civil rights. I mean, you just see someone working it, trying to, move it forward. So I think there's a lot more with the narrative to get people to do it. And I think in some strange way, people will appreciate bold, authentic leadership if you kind of say, you know what, I think this is the right time to do it. I'm hoping that will change.
What's remarkable about the Lyndon Johnson case, and I think the Merkel case, is neither of them were rose-colored about the cost of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Johnson understands that the South has gone when he passes those bills, and Merkel knows the gamble that she's taken, and that seems to me to be a trait. People they realize you've got to pay some political capital to have some long-term results. We've seen that in our own country. I think this question's been written down more than once, but if you were asked the question of what things you wish you'd known when you were younger, the 3 things, what are they?
Well, it's a good. I haven't. It's a good question. I would.
If you do
yeah,
say so
sorry,
yourself,
if I do say
right,
so myself, I've never asked myself. Seriously, so I'm trying to think about it right now. I'm not a good real-time thinker. That's the first thing I'd say. I'd say a couple. One is I was afraid when I started my career. I'd say that I was fearful. I was worried. First of all, I wanted to have a job. I was nervous about having a job, and then I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to be able to have a stable job, and then McKinsey is sort of up or out sort of thing. So I was nervous about that, and so I was less of a risk taker than I would have been more. I would have looked back and said, that was the time to actually swing it even harder. I was fairly disruptive in some of the things, but I would have pushed it. So I would have taken more risk. I guess that's the first thing I would do. The second is I would have moved more faster or earlier to different parts of the world and then not care where. I waited because I thought I had to have a certain capability, and I think there's a benefit in kind of challenging yourself in different cultures or roles. Probably a third thing is I wish I'd actually left McKinsey for a while and worked, for example, in the public sector and then come back, because I think but I was afraid that if you do that, you're gone. You can't come back. You can't. You know what I mean? So I probably would have done that. There were things like my thing now when I'm talking to people about whether they want to stay in McKinsey or go. I just say, literally do the thought. Just write, what do I want? Don't because we get caught up in worrying about what other people think you want or should want or where it might go. Just write down what you want, and I think your heart, your instinct's actually pretty good. And I would have, last thing I just say, I don't know if I've said 3 or 9 or 2, but one other thing I just say as I'm talking out loud, I had a mentor here in Canada, a Singaporean, Bruce knows him, named Sun Yen, and he did. I just want to tell a little story on this because he would mentor me. He was worried that I didn't understand business and where things were, and he literally had me read business books because I came from a non-business, and I have to do book reports. And one day I came in, and it was on a Friday, and he said to me, "I'm going to see the CEO of an oil company. It was in Canada on Monday, and I want you to give me your gut view as to what you think I should say." So that was great. So I worked all weekend, put this big document together, showed up on Monday, 8 o'clock, had this document, and showed him the document. And he looked at me, and then he looked at the document, and he literally flicked it off the table. And I went crazy. I mean, I just said, I won't say the language, but I said, "You son of a bitch." I said, I did all this work and you flicked it. I mean, this is I can't even believe this. And I said, "I will never work with you again." I was livid. And the more I talked, the angrier I got. I stormed out, and my office was right beside his, and it was a thin wall, right? So I heard him pick up the phone to one of my best friends, and he said, "Steve," he goes, "Dom, he's lost it. He's gone crazy, totally crazy." And then I could hear him talk. He goes, "Well, I don't know. I flicked the document. I should, but he's crazy. Can you come and come?" So he sure enough, Steve, "Hey, how's your weekend?" And I said, "Steve, that son of a bitch." And I said, "That guy, he had the audacity to take this, and he flicked it off, and I'll never work, blah blah." And of course he could hear everything I'm saying, right? So anyway, we went back in, and the point of the story is, this Sun Yen said to me, he says, "Look, I apologize for flicking it off the table, but what I asked you on Friday was your gut view. I actually didn't want you to do any analysis, because what I want you to learn is that as a leader, you're going to have to rely on your instinct. You're going to have to develop a gut muscle. And so you just destroyed my training for you. That's why I was angry. And I said, you could probably give me feedback in a different way than flicking my document off. But I've never forgotten as a result, and that's another thing I've said. There's times where I've been afraid to rely on instinct and sort of want to analyze, get more and more analysis when you actually know, and you should move.
I have two more questions for you. The first is where do you see governments developing talent well, which is to say not in what sectors, but what examples do we have of places as you travel the world of governments that are at least starting to get the challenge of recruiting talent and of flattening out their organizations and giving young people a chance to advance quickly through government? Are there some shining lights?
Yeah, I mean, one, and it's often difficult to use them as an example because it's small Singapore. I mean, they are obsessed with making sure they can find the right people, how they move them through the training that they provide. The training budget in the Singaporean civil service is, as a percentage, is higher than any private sector organization I've ever seen, right? In what they do and how they drive it, the performance standards that they expect, and so they're to me a shine. But it's a different, it's a kind of a different model.
And they have one of the great public policy schools in the world.
Yeah, they do the Leap One. Yeah, Australia is actually pretty good too. If you look at some of the Australia, I see in Australia they've been very good at I think because they attract people that come in and then they go out and they come in. You see a lot of you see more movement. But I'm saying this from a glimpse, not a comparatively all the way through. Those would be those are the ones that come to mind. But more of Singapore. I think Australia probably is learning a bit from us too. I don't know. You know what I mean? So
the final thing I want to get from you is some free insight, and you've given us a very good sense of what's disrupting the world, what's changing the stage, and those are all kind of the mega trends in a sense even. And we've got a sense of what the limits are now of governments in responding to them. In the case of our own country, which you obviously know well, both personally and professionally, if we were looking out now, it's 2016, if we were looking out 30 years, what would be the markers of Canada successfully navigating that period of time? What does our population look like? What does our economy look like? What's our place in the world?
Well, this is just, again, my own personal view.
That's why we have you here.
But a couple of things I'd say. One is I think on the population size, I would hope that we're, well on the way to a 70 million, 75 million person economy by 2070 type, but that's a jump up in terms of where we are today, where we're going to be significantly less than that. It'd be maybe 45 million, and I think we need that for our productivity, for our scale, for influence, and that. So I'd love to see us crank the. It's not just immigration. It's also I think what Quebec has done with childcare has actually helped with more women working, fertility, and so forth. There's our education system. So that's one. I would hope on the corporate side, we have 5 companies in Canada that are in the top 25 in their sectors, right? We used to have roughly 19 in 1990. I would hope we'd have 50. And I think we know the sectors. Ag food, I would hope we'd have 7 or 8 global champions. Like, these are in the top companies in the world that are based out of here. Metals and mining, energy and resources, healthcare. I think healthcare is a massive business opportunity, and we have all the data here. We have all the ingredients to be able to do that if we can unleash it. And so healthcare, we should have a whole series of global champions, actually because of our healthcare system and the way we've collected data. I would hope that on the innovation side of things that we are also developing, we have 6 or 7 unicorns, if you will, that are here. Taking our capability in artificial intelligence or quantum computing and being able to scale them. And again, their major market would not be Canada. I think if you want to be a significant innovator, you're thinking about you have to have a market of 200 million people, which forces us to do it. I'd hope we'd have free trade deals with all the major Asian companies, or Asian countries, and obviously with Europe and I guess the UK now. I'd hope we'd have, on the labor side of things, that we would have the model, like I used the Bismarck model, that someone would, 20 years from now look at Canada and say they're the ones that figured out how to deal with this disruption on people from a policy and a skills training point of view. And the final thing is that we've preserved the culture, our diversity in culture, which is the differentiating factor with it. And I think we shouldn't take it for granted. I think we're in an amazing place in the world today. It's so wonderful to be a Canadian in the world today, because actually, people notice that there's some interesting things that are going on. But I don't think we should take it for granted, because I think it could easily move. I think part of the reason is we're all of us 1 degree of separation, in a sense, from another part of the world. But good people can get angry and go, and so I think it's a muscle that we have to develop, and I hope that muscle is really strong, because when we do that, then we'll attract talent. People want to be in a place where you can be with different people and with the ideas and our governance. So those are some of the things I'd hope.
That's great. It's been a real pleasure having you here. I'm going to ask Alexa Gregg to give a formal thanks, but I just want to say on behalf of all of us and certainly on behalf of the school that it's been a real privilege and a real insight to have you with us for the last couple of hours. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.